Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 12th, 2025. For those of you that might be new to this broadcast, occasionally we mix in an Ask Me Everything episode. So you can send in questions, even if you're not a subscriber, to info@findingyouprograms.com. That is info@findingyouprograms.com. I'll get to those questions in the order that they're received. If you are a subscriber and a live participant, then you could submit questions live at any point, and I'll be happy to prioritize those over the folks that are sending them in. So submit those questions at any time. Before I get to the first question, let me go over some housekeeping and upcoming announcements. The next available Finding You Intensive will be August 13th through 17th. We just added that date. July is full, September is filling up. So if you want to attend a live Finding You, a 5-day experience, psychodrama, family of origin, really getting at the root of the issues that are playing themselves out today, Finding You is that option. Wonderful. I just finished running one. It was fantastic. We also have coaches and therapists who offer attachment-based, Finding You-based. They've been trained in the Finding You model. So if the way that I talk about things resonates with you and you want to work with a coach, reach out at info@findingyouprograms.com. You can go to our website for inquiries, private intensives, couples intensives, family intensives, anything Finding You. You can use that email that I mentioned. Like I've been talking about, I'm going to be hosting a 5-day workshop. This is somewhere between lecturing and an intensive in New York at the Omega Institute. 5 days, around $500 for 5 days. I'll be co-running that, co-facilitating that with my daughter, Emma. The name of the workshop is called The Audacity to Be You. The dates are October 12th through 17th in Rhinebeck, New York. If you are interested, even if you've attended an intensive, this is different enough that it still is a good fit for people that want to do their deeper work. Go to the Omega Institute website at eomega.org. That is eomega.org. Look at the workshops and register for the Audacity to Be You workshop. Coming up soon will be the Finding You Inner Circle. This is a subscription-based and a support of the Finding You podcast. So if you are a longtime listener and you want to attend these live sessions, also I'll be providing a couple of episodes per month that will not be available to the public. If you're a Finding You alumni, you are automatically subscribed. So check it out. Reach out to us at info@findingyouprograms.com. With that, let me get to the first pre-submitted questions. We had one that just came in. I see you're here. I'll get to that soon. And these are the pre-submitted questions. Give me a little patience because these are long because the person inquiring wants to set up the context. So here is the first message that I received. I have a young adult child, 23, who just moved home after living in a city, after going to school and then stayed for another year with roommates. During that time, they excelled in navigating city life and transportation and getting a job, not in their field, but just working and making decisions for themselves. For the past 4 years, they've been coming home every summer, and it's been really challenging because they take our space for granted. This child has ADHD and OCD, and we wrote a contract hoping to kind of clarify some of the conditions of them coming home and staying with us until they figure out their next steps. But something recently happened which they're not sharing with us, but they said it was one of the worst things that ever happened to them in their life. And I will do my best to help them connect with mental health support, but I understand that I can't fix this. I can give her unconditional love and support when asked, but I do know that she will put our needs at home very last in her priorities. I know this is a long explanation, but the question ultimately is, how do I put these boundaries and conditions in place when clearly they're going through something difficult, very difficult, without letting them down maybe? Then when they need our compassion the most. I'm not going to assume that things aren't going to go well at home as they have in the past few years, but based on previous experience, that's all I have to go on at this point. And when they say when I say not well, it's just that they don't respect our space, they don't help us, they have not kept our agreements, and I don't know if that's honest too. Thanks in advance. Wonderful question, and thanks for the context to give me an idea. I'm going to talk about several principles involved in this question that are important. The first one that I want to share with all of you is how I don't believe that contracts do the work that we think that they're going to do. It doesn't matter where that is. In families, when people come up with contracts, what my experience suggests to me is that people think, even if it's agreed to and negotiated on the front end, people imagine that the contract will do the work, that it will set the boundaries for you. But invariably, I have found that you're still going to have to confront the situation, the circumstances in real time. The contract won't do the heavy lifting for you. For me, the most important part of creating a contract is the clarity and confidence that it can give you, so that when you are establishing, setting, and enforcing a boundary, you have some confidence that you've communicated clearly, because that is one of the things that throws people off their rhythm, that throws people, that throws them for a loop, is they imagine and can even be told by the other person that you didn't clarify, you didn't make this clear. So setting up the contract gives one the confidence that you've communicated clearly. So that's the first principle. Contracts are nice, but don't do the work for you. You're going to be required by the individual that you're setting with to enforce, to establish, to discuss, to follow up with that boundary in real time, most likely more than once. One of my favorite authors says that boundaries aren't something that we can do in sort of a drive-by fashion. We can't set drive-by boundaries. And for those of us codependents, the greatest challenge is that we work up so much courage and capacity to finally establish and set a boundary orally, or in this case, written. And so we hope that is all that it's going to be required of us, but it's not. My experience tells me that very rarely does that happen, even though it's written down and even though the other person may have agreed to it orally or even signed it. You're still going to have to do something. Secondly, in a couple of questions, I've read some of the questions that have come in advance, and there's going to be a theme, I believe, this evening, and that is the work still is on your end to find a way to essentially, you talk about in this question, you don't want to let them down. That is what you're going to have to do. Right? Enlightenment, awareness, consciousness means that we have to accept the parts of us that we don't want to exist, that we imagine that we've eradicated from our psyche. We don't want to be the bad one, the villain, the individual, the parent who lets our child down. In my experience, what that means is that you're going to have to face that part of you that lets her down. You're going to have to accept, in a real sense, if you set a boundary, that you're letting her down. Now, going backwards, you can decide what boundary to set up. If something about her circumstance suggests to you that she needs extra support, and this is a key. I'm going to say this very simply. In fact, so simply, it's so easy to miss it. You can figure out what's going on for her, what she's struggling with, and you can develop the capacity. But ultimately, boundaries are something that we can do, something that we are able to do. If boundaries were easy, everybody would do it, but we're going to have to face our own shame, our own fears of abandonment, of rejection, our own fears that we will be that parent who doesn't show unconditional love, who does have conditions. Ultimately, I don't put a lot of weight in the phrase unconditional love. In fact, in some ways, I think in virtually all relationships, that's kind of a nonsensical idea, unconditional love. What that says is that you can treat me virtually any way that you want to, and I will still love you. Now, if we're talking about the feeling of respect, the feeling of compassion, maybe then I could be sold on the idea of unconditional love. But if we're talking about showing up and being present and allowing them to come home, or showing up to the marriage or any relationship, the idea of unconditional love might be fraught with principles of codependency. It's okay to have limits and boundaries. And even in parenting, where I for myself, aspire to reach a high level of capacity, I see one of my great purposes in life in serving and supporting my children on their journey to where they need to get to go. But I have limits. I am a human being. I'm not a machine. I'm not a robot. I'm not enlightened and fully actualized. I haven't transcended the human experience. So my humanness is going to show up. That means that I will have limits to my patience. I will have limits to how much I can listen, how much I can bear, how much I can tolerate. And inevitably, the child, my child, your child, will find those limits. And so the magic trick in these limits, these boundaries, is not saying to the child, this is for your own good, this is what you need, but to own your humanness, to own your capacity and where it ends. And that sounds like, this is all I can do. This is all I'm willing to do. This is all I'm able to do. I can or can't do this thing that's being asked of me. And so that's where I stop. That's where my limit, my boundary is. So you don't get to win or be the good guy. I've been talking about this in my own therapy and with clients as of late. You know, I want to be the good guy. I want to have a dialogue with my child about such visits like you're describing here. And I want to get to a point in the dialogue where we all agree on the fact that dad's a good guy, that his heart is in, that he loves his child. And that even when I make a mistake, I still want to come out of it looking shiny. But we have to confront those parts of us that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't confronted. That is what our relationships, especially our parenting relationships and our marriage relationships, will show us. They will eventually expose the parts of ourselves that we have not dealt with, the parts of ourselves that we have not accepted, seen, allowed to come into our consciousness because they're too shameful, too limited. We don't want to be that thing, that aspect, that characteristic. So it's okay to let them down. Heinz Kohut, a great analyst, once called these moments empathic failures, to illustrate the fact that every human being will find the edge of their capacity. So letting them down is exactly what you have to accept. Now, where you draw that line, I have no opinion about it. And in my experience, mental health professionals also don't have an opinion about that. Even in the meetings, the rooms of Codependence Anonymous and Al-Anon, it's not about dictating to you what is the right limit. See, we want to be right. We want to be justified. We want to be found without fault. And we don't get to do that. We just get to be a self. And the way that is illustrated in the slogans of the 12-step world is the slogan that says, no is a complete sentence. And what other people think about me is none of my business. In other words, I don't have to be right. I don't have to give an explanation. I don't have to justify my boundary, my reasoning, my limits. And you're allowed to be angry and think I'm a failure or an unloving or a non-compassionate. You're allowed to think virtually anything that you want about me. And I have to do the work to come to terms with my humanness, my fallibility, the literal nature of what it means to be a Homo sapien. So for me, it means that you're going to have discussions. You're going to have to work it out in real time. You're going to have to find out where your line is. And again, how do you find out where that line is? Well, since there's no appeal to the ultimate judge of right and wrong, you have to find that in your heart. And for me, the transition from active codependency to recovery in codependency is that people in active codependency want to be right and good. And people in recovery accept that they're a human being. They can carry their own shadow. Right? They can carry the bad parts of themselves that they wish didn't exist, or that they were told if those things did exist, they would be unlovable and rejected, not worthy of connection. So we have to carry our own stuff. Instead of projecting it onto the people around us, the people that are closest to us, and saying, I'm only doing this for your best interest. I only love you. I have unconditional love. And this is for your own good. Again, that is a way of us not owning, not carrying our own shadow. So this is a beautiful question that really does illustrate the dilemma of what it means to be human and to be in relationship. So I support you. It's difficult. Where you draw that line, taking into consideration their limits, their ADHD, their diagnosis, their mental health struggles, is of course important. But at the end of the day, you can only do what you can do. And if you show up to a relationship, to a conversation, to a situation because you should, not because you can, you will end up mistreating or abusing that person or yourself. So it has to come with an honest, conscious appraisal of one's own capacity. And we don't like to be incapable. We think that that is somehow a conviction of our unworthiness. But the fact of the matter is, everybody has a limit to their capacities. The most enlightened people in the world, what separates the most enlightened people in the world is not that they have no capacities, although they have great capacity. What separates them is not that they have no end to their capacity. What separates them is they know it and they own it. And they say things like, I'm sorry, this is all I can do. Thich Nhat Hanh says in one of his books to illustrate this thought experiment kind of conversation with a loved one. And he says, and I'll summarize, he says something along the lines of, when I reach the end of my capacity, I say to my loved one, dear one, my feelings are something I need to attend to. I need to take space and go to my practice, in his case, my meditation. And I will come back when I am more full. And then you go to your practice and you come back and you say, dear one, now I am here for you. I have fed myself and now I can listen to your anger, to your hurt, and to your pain. And I can hold it and I can carry it. That is the psychology of relationships, the psychology of boundaries. Thank you for the question. Wonderful question. Second question, also quite long with a lot of background, so be patient with me. Somebody writes, I am bringing this question to you because of your rare empathy for people with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. I am grateful for your explanation of its development and its psychology. I am certain my mother has NPD. I was deeply traumatized by my childhood with her, but I found so much healing in therapy. I now have very firm boundaries and very limited communication with her for my emotional protection. Based on discussions with family members, I am also fairly certain I know what her narcissistic wound was, and I feel for her deeply. I believe she may have been molested by a family friend and emotionally neglected by her parents, who were focused on her two troubled siblings. She has spent her entire life hiding her wounds from herself and others, and performing all the destructive narcissistic behaviors that protect her own ego and harm others. Truly, I think I am no longer angry and I feel I have forgiven her, though I must still remain vigilant to keep her safely at a distance. I feel so sad for her that not only did she experience such pain in childhood, but that she developed such maladaptive ways to manage her pain and continues to suffer because of it. It seems so unjust to me that the wounded must continue to suffer and then inflict more suffering on others. I wish I could help her. I wish I could just get her in therapy and confront her with her wound, and tell her what happened to her, that it wasn't her fault, that she didn't deserve it, and that she's still beautiful, valuable, and that I love her. NPD seems like a life sentence of a psychological construct, so why shouldn't I try something unorthodox to help her break free? I have tried, though, unsuccessfully, to get her to join me in therapy. But then tonight, I listened to your 2016 episode on entitlement, episode 3, where you mentioned respecting the walls children create to protect themselves and not to use my X-ray vision to knock them down, because they're there for a reason, for protection. As far as my own children are concerned, I am so grateful to have heard that advice. I will absolutely be mindful of it and respect their walls. As it pertains to my mother, however, with suspected NPD, she will probably take her wall to the grave with her. So why shouldn't I try to knock it down? I am imagining you now feeling horrified at my suggestion, but I would still be grateful to hear your thoughts. Well, first of all, I'm not even in the least bit horrified. And in some ways, while I teach general principles like don't use your X-ray vision to be invasive or intrusive to somebody who has a wall up, Sometimes I say to people, try what you want. Sometimes the most unorthodox approach works. That's why I try to stay away from advice. I want to talk about principles that inform us, but I want to stop short of advice, because sometimes clients try things that I never would have come up with or suggested, and they work. So my first response is try it. Sometimes grabbing your loved one by the shirt collar and raising your voice and begging them and pleading with them works, gets their attention. So not only am I not repelled by your or horrified by your suggestion, but give it a try, see if it works. Be ready to drop it when it doesn't. Be ready to retreat back to the position that you're at. But you said something that is really, really wise that I want to point out to the audience listening, and that is you've developed a great deal of compassion and love for her while holding what sounds like to be pretty significant boundaries with her in terms of the time that you allow her in your presence. And what I want to share with everybody is that's how compassion in relationships sometimes is built, by boundaries. Conversely, resentment, anger, and rage at somebody often is a sign that we're not setting healthy boundaries. We are not taking care of ourselves. And the resentment, the rage, the anger at the person is because they're not taking care of us either. They're treating us in ways that we don't like. So you're very wise to set strict boundaries in this case. And I would offer that, in my experience, that is what makes you capable of love. It's what I mean when I share that quote that says a healthy boundary is the distance between me and you at which I can love me and you simultaneously. And if you're finding yourself resentful, ask yourself, is there a boundary that I am avoiding? Am I asking and expecting somebody else to do the heavy lifting that is my responsibility? So that is wonderful. So the last thing I want to say about potentially knocking down her wall is, ideally it comes from a place of love. Can you channel and feel the love in your heart for her while you're saying what you're saying? And if you find yourself getting into anger and rage, I say this sometimes to therapists, don't give people feedback. Don't give them criticism unless it is bathed and drenched in love. If it comes from a place of anger or fear or judgment, don't say it. Just set the boundary and walk away. So I think you have the building blocks for so much. And I'm so glad that you sent this in, because it illustrates some important principles for everybody. Resentment is often, not always, but often a sign that we haven't been taking good care of ourselves. That is, setting healthy, courageous, and clear boundaries. But when we do set clear boundaries, we open ourselves up to love and compassion. If I lived with my mother, it would probably be very hard to access the compassion that I feel for her sitting here right now, 800 miles away from her, with a handful of visits a year. I can maintain compassion toward her with that proximity. That is the safe distance between us, that I can love her and myself at the same time. And as she battles the cancer that is in her body now, that's a new announcement if you've been listening to me. As she battles the cancer in her body, I have found myself accessing deeper levels of compassion as I reflect. But the boundary stays clear. The boundary is what allows me to have the compassion that I'm feeling in my heart. So thank you. Somebody just sent in a question, and I'm going to write, I'm going to take that question first before I go on to the rest. Let me see. Takes me just a second. All right. Here's the question that came in just before I started. Somebody writes and says this to me. My son has been home from treatment for 5 months now. We moved to a different state so he could have a fresh start away from his friends who are struggling with substance abuse. He is self-isolating and not doing any of the things that will help his mental health. He has been smoking weed and vaping. He hates where we live and talks about going back to California often. 2 days ago, he punched a hole in the wall and said that every day he doesn't get to go that he doesn't get to go to California, he'll punch another hole in the wall, which he did not, in fact, punch another hole in the wall the next day. He would threaten me physically. I was non-reactive. I did leave the house because it was scaring the dog. I have an excellent parent coach therapist who I just had a phone call with 2 days ago before my son punched the hole in the wall. I have been working on my relationship with my son, listening to him without judgment or offering my advice, and not policing or spying on him like I used to. My son will turn 18 in 7 months. I think that his wilderness therapy program in Idaho was the best therapy he ever had. I'm considering him going back to wilderness therapy if he gets worse and his life is in danger. We only have 7 months left until he is 18. What's the difference between teen wilderness therapy and young adult wilderness therapy? Our relationship is damaged from being forced to go to wilderness and an RTC, so I'd probably only send him to wilderness if his life was in danger. Well, this is one of those questions that's really hard because it's so difficult to solve it. It is absolutely challenging. So let me say first and foremost this. Let me go back to a couple of parts. Again, like the other questions, you don't have to follow through on old agreements if what he's doing is making you or him unsafe. Just like you've said, if his life was in danger, you're willing to take the nuclear option again. So my support of you, and I know that you're here listening, I can see your name here, is I support you in whatever you decide to do. It's not okay. And I know this sounds strange to listeners, but I'm going to say this. I can imagine a circumstance where a child punches a hole in my wall and it's not triggering. And I'm not traumatized by it or afraid. And I'm not angry. I can imagine that. I can also imagine my child doing much less and me being afraid or angry or feeling unsafe. So the act itself is not the thing. It's how you feel. And again, like the previous questions, the responsibility is for you to cope with and deal with the parts of yourself that you need to deal with. There's no right answer, but you have my support. And it could be argued that he's already qualified for sending back, but you're not on a hair trigger. And you're willing to play this thing out a little bit. And for me, my son was 17. It wasn't violence or aggression. But after being in wilderness and after being in residential treatment, I considered sending him away again before he turned 18, about the same time that you're at, same timeline. And I literally had the phone number for the transporters and the consultant and the admissions person literally in my back pocket, in my wallet. And that was an option on the table. And luckily, through discussions, the behavior that he was exhibiting that was leading me to think that wilderness therapy or treatment might be necessary subsided, dissipated. And since then, he has been free and clear of that behavior. And it's been 16 years since then, 15 years since then. So you can do what you can do. And there is a limit. There is a limit that you have in your body. And I would respect that. The phrase that wilderness therapy and RTC ruin your relationship, I know that one size doesn't fit all. And if he were my client and he talked about being sent away, I would listen to him indefinitely about his resentment. Absolutely. But eventually, children have to grow up. Even if you had, quote unquote, abused him in a more traditional sense of the way that we use the word abuse, it would still be his job to grow up and to learn how to make peace, to forgive, not for your sake or even the sake of the relationship, but for his own sake and his own burden. My mother and father made countless mistakes. Too many to number. I have made countless mistakes as a father. It could be argued that sending my son away was a mistake, or my third child, that I had a similar kind of intervention, him go to a similar kind of intervention was a mistake. I don't know. I can't know for sure because I chose what felt best for me at the time. But this idea of holding that over my head and saying it ruined the relationship, that's not about me. My oldest son was one time attending a parent meeting in New York City with me. It was his birthday, and so we were vacationing there, but I had some work. And he came to the parent meeting for half of it that I was running that week. He had plans with friends. He had lived in New York for a while, and so he had planned some things for that evening. And I said, "Hey, do you want to join me?" He said, "I can join you for about an hour." And at one point, the entire group of parents started asking him questions. And one of the questions that was asked, the last one was, "Have you forgiven your father for sending you away to treatment?" And he was befuddled at the question and did his best to answer. And after he left, I said, "I think the reason that my son was befuddled at the question is because he was allowed to hate me for it. He was allowed to be angry at me for it. I had no defense because I wasn't needing to be right about it." And so that idea that I won't forgive you and that you ruin the relationship, that is a child's mind. Those are children's words. And I don't care how old he is. I don't care if he's 55 years old. That's still a child's reasoning. And if you have ruined the relationship by seeking out treatment and trying something you thought would help his mental health and keep him safe, okay. He is allowed to have that feeling, that opinion. And if it's his desire to never talk to you again, he's allowed to have that also. So be careful of that phrase because I don't think on its surface it is entirely true. Lastly, your question, what's the difference between wilderness therapy for adults or for adolescents? Once they're out there, it's 99% the same. The biggest difference is adults can't be forced to go, and adolescents can, just like any boundary, really. Right? Any boundary with an adolescent, you can set the boundary, and they ultimately are subject to your authority. But adults can say, "Peace out. I'm done. I leave." Right? They leave behind the support, but they can walk away. And that walking away, it doesn't get easier when he's an adult. And I'm not by any means suggesting to you what you should do, but I do want you to know it does not get easier to set boundaries with young adults than it does with adolescents. Adolescents, setting boundaries with adolescents, we have a cheat. We have a shortcut. We have a hack available to us. And that cheat, that hack is that legally we are allowed to make decisions about sending them to boarding school or treatment. Whereas with adults, we can't. So it's a tough one. And again, you're allowed to set boundaries. And you don't have to take an indefinite amount of complaining and criticism. You can take as much as you can take. Like I always say, sometimes I can listen to my children express rage at me. And sometimes I don't stand it when they roll their eyes. And what's the difference between those two examples? One, I have a lot of capacity, and one, I have little. And do you see how the shift is from judgment, good and bad, right and wrong, should or shouldn't, to just description? I have capacity so I can listen. I don't have capacity so I can't. My job is to own that and to behave and set boundaries accordingly. Thank you for that. Very, very difficult. Very difficult. Somebody sends this in live. Our son, nearly 21, has decided to stop education after high school, but cannot afford things without our help. He has been told we will fund a career of his choice. He has no career interests. He wants an athletic, fame-driven career, which is not happening. How do we guide our son on what might fit him better so he at least chooses something that might work out without being involved? We want him to make his own decision. His go-to is to blame us. Again, wonderful, wonderful question. I think incredibly relatable. Similar in the vein of what I've been talking about, you can offer ideas, you can offer coaching, you can even, if you are inclined and want to, although this isn't my style, you can even offer advice. But really, this is just about you summoning the courage to set boundaries and to be a failure, meaning that be clear with him about what you're willing to support and what you're willing and what you're not willing to support, and let him figure it out. There's an old idea, it's not an old idea, it's just an idea that it's common, that children tend to get more insightful and wise the farther they are away from our bank accounts, right? Then real life is teaching them. And so I think there is some responsibility on your part to be judicious about your support that feels right to you, And the lesson that comes out of that, I wouldn't encourage you to do it in a contrived, manipulative way, but boundaries aren't for changing our children or our partner, but boundaries do change people. When somebody gets fired at work for showing up inebriated, that's the boundary of the workplace. That's what they have. And the work doesn't necessarily do it to change or to force the person to hit bottom, but oftentimes such a boundary does hit bottom, right? Getting a DUI, getting arrested, showing up in a hospital, overdose, whatever it is, those experiences do tend to change people. So your job, your responsibility is to set the boundary. And then let the lesson learning, leave that up to him. But be clear about what you're comfortable with. Be clear about what you're not. If you want to offer or enter a dialogue about his future and what it looks like and how much it costs to support yourself at the lifestyle, at the level that he's accustomed to, you can try that. Of course, absolutely. But many people, many young people in this position will be too threatened by that discussion, will feel too defensive about it. And if that starts to show itself, that's time for you to drop it or to press harder, I suppose, and run the risk of really, creating a separation and alienating him from you and you from him. But it's a tough one. And I suspect that whatever boundaries you decide to set around support, I suspect that the lessons will be inherent in that process, intrinsic with the boundary. And I know that you would support him if he would come to you and want to problem solve or ask advice or work with you on that. I know you would. But really, it's especially at this age, it's about the boundaries, not the teaching, not the lecturing, not the problem solving, about the boundaries. Thanks for sending that in. Great question. All right, I have a couple more pre-submit question. Somebody said, how do I know when it's time to walk away from a relationship that feels emotionally unbalanced, even though there's still love between us? Gosh, you guys ask really, really difficult questions, don't you? You know it's time when you decide it's time. You get to decide. The kinds of things that I would suggest you consider before setting that ultimate boundary is talking to them about how you feel, about the hurts, about what you need, about what your limits are, and what you're asking in order to stay in a relationship, right? Boundaries, I love this idea. Boundaries aren't walls, they are doors that show the people that we care about how to stay in relationship to us. So the how do you know? You know when you decide. You know when you there's no right. There's never going to be a moment when God comes down from wherever God is and gives you a permission slip and says you have reached the threshold and you are completely justified, right? That's what we want. And all of these. That's what we were taught implicitly as children, is that we had to be right. The defenses that our parents exhibited, and they all did, all of them, even the best of them, the defenses that they embodied showed us that we had to be right, that they had to be right and good. The way that they talked to us when we were upset with them suggested, implied to us that we had to be right. So I think the question is really that you're asking is, when do you get to be right? And my answer is, you don't get to be right. Somebody once said that a relationship like this, everybody's going to hurt you. Everybody in the world, even your soulmate, is going to hurt you. And the decision for you, the choice for you is, who's worth it? And for me, it's not about whether or not my wife is perfect, because she's far from perfect as I am. It's not that she raises her voice or hurts me or says cruel things or is sarcastic. It's not the mistakes that she makes. It's the defense. And being up against the defense that she has to be the good one, or her being up against my defense that I have to be good, that is exhausting. That's untenable. So in relationships, in marriage and in parenting, it's the defense that's the hard thing to live with. The need for that person to be good and right, beyond reproach. But if the person has done enough work, that's you or me or them, has done enough work that they accept their fallibility, they've learned, as the subtitle from my book suggests, they've learned to love the horrible, rotten self. They won't stand and argue about how they had good intentions and how you misunderstand them. They will listen, right? That's the healing of the narcissistic wound. They will listen. They might not capitulate and behave the way that you're requesting or suggesting that they ought to, or that you would like them to, but they will listen. And they will reinvest in their own work. So for me, my wife being my wife is because she's working and growing. She had a therapy session today. And to me, that is what I am blessed with. I am blessed with a partner who is taking on the responsibility of carrying her own shadow, her own darkness, and doesn't offload it to me. I am not the key to her happiness. As we decided when we got together after a short separation, as we decided, it is not my job to make her happy. That is her job. And it is not her job to make me happy. That is my job. So we've decided to go and to get our individual happiness, to present ourselves to the relationship happy. So I just want somebody who's working on the project. And that doesn't mean that they get it right all the time, or they're perfectly, gracefully moving from one awareness to another. That means that in the end of the day, that they're willing to own their stuff. That I don't have to be the scapegoat for their unhappiness. And so it doesn't matter to me if your child blames you. That was part of the other question, right? It doesn't matter if your child blames you. That's what children do. That's the second stage of development that I've talked about, that my daughter talks about. Right? The first stage is I am bad. The second stage is you are bad. And the third stage is we're all kind of messed up. And we want children to move to that third stage, especially when the blame is directed at us. But if we try to force them into that third stage, to that level of maturity that they have not quite arrived at, the risk is that they'll go back into stage one, which is I am bad. And that's an untenable place to live in the long term. So we hold space for our children and their blame, always accounting for what we can and cannot tolerate and setting our boundaries accordingly. Thank you for the question. The last question I have for tonight, somebody writes in, how can I maintain compassion, care, and meaningful connection in family relationships when deeply held political or philosophical views differ significantly, especially when those views feel fundamentally at odds with my values? Well, thanks for the last question that is so easy to answer. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. It's kind of in the same spirit of the other answers, it's you get to decide. For me, there's a line about what I'm willing to talk about. My mother holds political beliefs that are, and political beef and beliefs that are at dramatic odds with me almost on every front. So I am unwilling to engage in anything that has to do with politics or policy or people in politics. That's my boundary. And when it comes up, I step away. And sometimes she can't help herself, and that means that I'm going to spend more time away. There's no, how do you maintain compassion is through boundaries. And again, nobody says that. Nobody talks about that. I don't hear anybody talking about that. But that's the obvious solution. Compassion, care, and non-judgment are supported by our boundaries. And perhaps the most difficult relationships are the ones where setting a boundary costs us more than just discomfort. Having a co-parent that you might be divorced from, for example, it's difficult to set boundaries in a sense because you have to interact in some capacity to co-parent. So those are the ones that are the most difficult. Somebody that you rely on financially. It's hard to be compassionate toward a boss, right? Toward a police officer. There's a power differential there. Right? If you're working on a group project that's really important to you, like raising a child, boundaries become incredibly difficult to discern, to negotiate, to decide. But outside of that, my compassion and non-judgment comes from and because of my boundaries. But to set those, I have to face the parts of myself that I have been unwilling to face up to this point, which is largely that I am, quote unquote, a bad guy, a bad husband, a bad friend, a bad father. I have to accept or really transcend those ideas. I have to go beyond those simple cultural ideas and accept that's my limit. And you can think of me a fool, an idiot, crazy, neurotic, rigid, bad, uncaring, unloving. You can accuse me of anything if I'm willing to set it. And I'm not moved because I surrender. In my life, the great freedom came when I accepted that I was the bad one, the devil, as I like to say. When I stopped trying to prove to everybody and get everybody to subscribe to the Brad Fan Club is when I became free. As Alan Watts says, everything that you were told to fear is what stands in the way. And on the other side of that fear, that darkness, that thing that you were told is evil, once you eradicate that idea, nothing is left but love. The wise ones are compassionate and loving and non-judgmental because of their boundaries, because of their practice, because of the discipline of their practice of self-care. They don't generate capacity from thin air. They generate it in real time by a meditation practice, by exercise, by therapy, by whatever it is that feeds them. And that is our work. But we like to control and change other people and their perceptions of things because that is easier. We've had success with that. But this stuff is deeper and longer work. I think the reason that so many of the important principles in psychotherapy don't sell well is because therapy takes a long time. We have wonderful epiphanies along the way, wonderful moments of relief and joy and connection to ourselves and to others along the way. But fundamentally, it is a lifelong journey. That's how long it lasts. So thank you for that question. All right, wrapping up. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. The next available intensive, we've just announced this, is August 13th. After that, it's September 3rd. We also have coaches and therapists that are trained in our model. For those inquiries or all private intensives, email us, go to our website, or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. If you want to attend a 5-day workshop with me in New York this fall, October 12th through 17th, at the beautiful resort of Omega in New York, go to eomega.org and search under workshops and sign up for the Audacity Be You workshop run by me and supported by my daughter, Emma. So that'll be fantastic. I'm looking so forward to that. I'm going to be talking about the science of holding space, the science of what it takes to hold space, and what happens when space is held for us. We talk about containing. We talk about supporting listening. I'm going to be talking about that with some scientific language behind it so we understand what's happening. That'll be Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, June 17th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I look forward to that. All right, folks, thanks for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your week. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for listening and showing up to these, because your participation, your listening makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.